Chapter 1 of Wholesome Cooking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jennifer Beckett Wood. Wholesome Cooking by Ethel Longley Harris. Soups. General directions. Lean beef, mutton or veal is the basis of all good rich soups, but fresh bones and those from cooked meat and poultry with trimmings of meats and odds and ends of vegetables, cooked or raw, make very good stock when economy is desired. In seasoning soup, the general rule is to use, for every quart of water used to cover the meat, a teaspoonful of salt, one of pepper, a quarter teaspoonful of celery salt, a little parsley, and half a pint of vegetables. In making stock, it is a safe rule to use a quart of water to every pound of bones. Soup should always be boiled slowly. The stock will probably be reduced nearly 1/2 by cooking and may be diluted for the table. Strain through the colander and put aside to let the fat harden before removing it. To colour soups brown, add a tablespoonful of caramel, brown sugar, to a pint of stock. Clear soups are dinner soups. Cream soups are more appropriate for luncheons. Part beef and veal or mutton combine to make a better flavoured stock than beef alone. A stock stronger and more palatable than the common one we call a consommé, and it serves as the foundation of soup for a formal dinner. The following directions are intended only for a very rich soup. Rich consommé. A veal shank weighing about 2 pounds, 5 pounds of beef and bones, a chicken, a hen will do, 2 carrots, 1 onion, half a turnip, 1 stalk of celery, 3 quarts of water, and salt and pepper to taste. Put the beef and veal in the pot with the cold water and boil slowly, skimming until clear. After half an hour's boiling, add the vegetables and let boil for 2 hours. Then take the veal out of the pot, as all the juices will have been extracted from it. Put in the fowl and let boil slowly for 3 hours more. Skim again, then remove from the fire. After it has cooled, take off any fat that has come to the top of the stock. A more economical consommé, and one quite good enough for everyday purposes, is made as follows. Clear soup or consommé. Take a good-sized shank of beef, chopped in several pieces. Put it into a very large pot, or divide it and put it into 2 smaller pots. Cover it well with cold water, leaving just enough room to let it boil. As soon as it comes to a boil, set it back on the stove so that it will boil very slowly, but keep it boiling. After it has boiled 3 hours, have ready a couple of turnips, 3 or 4 carrots, 3 large onions sliced, and 2 heads of celery. After washing these well, add them to the pot or pots. Let the stock boil slowly for 3 hours more, and then strain through a colander and put away to cool until the next day. When it is quite cold and the fat has risen to the top, skim it off. Add pepper and salt to taste, about half a grated nutmeg, a tablespoonful each of mushroom and anchovy sauce, and tomato ketchup. Put it all back on the stove in a clean pot and add the whites of 3 eggs well beaten. Do not skim. Let it boil 5 minutes, set aside a moment, then strain through a cloth laid in a sieve. This will keep for days. Heat it as you need it, and be sure that it is served very hot. The fat skimmed from the stock is excellent for frying potatoes. Dried bean soup. Soak 1 quart of beans overnight in enough water to cover them well. In the morning, drain them and put them on the stove with 4 quarts of cold water and 1/4 pound of salt pork cut in very small pieces. Boil slowly for 3 hours, keeping the pot covered. If soft enough at the end of that time, mash through a colander. If the water has boiled away too much, add a little before straining. Put in a teaspoonful of salt and a half teaspoonful of pepper and boil for 10 minutes more. This is a very economical as well as an excellent soup, particularly adapted for winter use. Canned corn soup. Drain a can of corn, chop it fine in a wooden chopping bowl, add a quart of boiling water and cook for 1 hour, letting it simmer. Rub through a colander, leaving the husks behind. Return to the fire with the water in which it has been boiled. Season with half a teaspoonful of salt, a quarter teaspoonful of pepper, and 1 tablespoonful of tomato ketchup. Boil gently for 3 minutes and stir in 3 tablespoonfuls of butter, which has been rolled in 1 tablespoonful of flour. Have ready in another pot a quart of milk which has just come to the boil. Pour it over 2 eggs which have been previously beaten. Add milk and eggs to the soup. Simmer for 1 minute, stirring all the time. Take up and serve very hot. The eggs may be omitted and flour used to thicken the soup if economy is desired. In this case, mix 2 tablespoonfuls of flour to a smooth paste in a cup of cold water before putting it in the soup. Potato soup. Boil and mash 10 medium-sized potatoes, seasoning with a teaspoonful of salt and pepper. Add enough milk to enable the potatoes to be pressed through a sieve. Then add a quart of milk in which an onion has been scalded. Remove the onion and boil all the other ingredients together for 1 minute. Put a tablespoonful of finely chopped parsley in the bottom of the tureen, pour in the soup and serve. Cream tomato soup. Heat half a can of tomatoes and half a cup of water, putting in half a teaspoonful of soda and keep on the stove until soft. Mix 3 tablespoonfuls of flour or cornstarch with enough milk to make a smooth, thin batter. Add a piece of butter half the size of an egg. Season with a teaspoonful of salt, a quarter teaspoonful of pepper, and a tablespoonful of mushroom ketchup. Add 1 quart of morning's milk, pouring slowly over the tomatoes and stirring constantly until the soup thickens. Strain at once through a sieve. Heat in a double boiler before serving. If the milk is not morning's milk, it is liable to curdle. Oyster soup. Put a quart of milk into a double boiler. When it is scalding hot, add a pint of milk in which 3 tablespoonfuls of cornstarch have been blended, a piece of butter the size of an egg, a half teaspoonful of salt, and a quarter teaspoonful of pepper. Stir slowly while adding this to the milk in the double boiler and continue stirring until it is as thick as boiled custard. Drain a quart of oysters and add them to the mixture. Let them cook until they begin to shrivel a little. Then serve very hot. Turkey or chicken soup. Take any bones left from roasted fowls, break them apart, and put them with the meat and skin into a soup kettle with 2 quarts of cold water, or a little more if that is not sufficient to cover them well. Add 3 medium-sized onions, sliced, and 4 blades of celery cut into half-inch pieces. Let this heat slowly and boil very slowly. When almost done, add a couple of tablespoonfuls of the cold stuffing and, after boiling a few minutes more, lift out the bones and strain the soup through a colander. When it is cool, skim off the fat that has risen to the surface and put away ready for use. Add pepper and salt just before heating the soup for the table. French vegetable soup. To 2 quarts of boiling water, add 1 cupful each of diced carrots, turnips, potatoes, and onions. Let simmer in a closed saucepan for half an hour. Then add 2 tablespoonfuls of butter, 1 tablespoonful of salt, and 3 tablespoonfuls of cream. The vegetables must be well done, but not broken. Other vegetables may be added, such as a cupful of peas or small beans. If either of the latter be a leftover, and therefore cooked, it may be run through a sieve and the puree added to the soup. Rice and tomato soup. Strain and press through a sieve with a wooden spoon 1/2 of a 3-pound can of tomatoes and stir into them 2 quarts of clear stock that has been made from bones. Season with a teaspoonful of salt and a quarter teaspoonful of pepper, and 4 ounces of rice that has been washed in plenty of cold water, and boil the soup slowly for 3/4 of an hour. Onion soup. 1 quart of milk, 2 large onions, 1 tablespoonful of butter. Brown the butter slightly in a saucepan, slice in the onions and let them cook through and brown, but not burn. Heat the milk to boiling point. Cut 2 slices of bread in inch pieces and lay in a tureen. Put the cooked onions on the bread and pour over them the hot milk and 1 cup of hot cream. Season with a teaspoonful of salt and a quarter teaspoonful of pepper. Onion and celery soup. A half cupful of chopped onions, a half cupful of chopped celery, 3 cupfuls of water, 1 tablespoonful of butter, 1 tablespoonful of flour, 1 teaspoonful of salt, a liberal shaking of pepper, and milk or cream as needed. Prepare the onions and celery and simmer slowly in the water until tender. This will require over an hour. Then run through fruit press, return to kettle, add seasoning, rub butter smooth with flour, pour on some of the hot soup, then return to kettle and boil well. Now add milk or thin cream until it is of the desired consistency. It should be rather thin. Split pea soup. Soak 1 cup split peas overnight in cold water. In the morning drain, then add 2 1/2 quarts of water, 1/4 pound of salt pork and 1 onion chopped fine. Simmer slowly until soft, then press through a strainer. Add a teaspoonful of butter, 2 tablespoonfuls of flour, mixed with a little cold water, then add a teaspoonful of salt, 1/4 teaspoonful of pepper, and 2 cups of hot milk, and let come to the boiling point. Serve hot. Duchess soup. 2 slices each of carrot and onion cooked in a tablespoon of butter 5 minutes. Add 1 quart of white stock and 1 small blade of mace and cook for 15 minutes. Melt 2 tablespoonfuls of butter, stir in 2 tablespoonfuls of flour until free from lumps. Add gradually the seasoned stock, 1/2 tablespoonful of salt, 1 saltspoonful of pepper, and 1 pint of rich milk. Stir in 4 tablespoonfuls of grated cheese. Cook 2 minutes. White soup stock. Put 4 pounds of knuckle of veal in a pot. Cover with 2 quarts of cold water. Add 1 tablespoonful of salt, 1 teaspoonful of pepper, 1 onion, 1 blade of mace, 2 stalks of celery. Bring all to the boiling point, then simmer for 4 or 5 hours, strain and cool, and skim off fat. White stock may also be made from chicken, but is more expensive than the veal stock. Clam soup. To a quart of clam juice, add a cupful of hot milk. Thicken with a tablespoonful of butter and 1 of flour blended together. Then add the clams chopped fine. Season and bring the soup again to the boiling point. A spoonful of whipped cream served on each plate of soup is an improvement. Croutons for soup. Cut bread into slices 1 inch thick. Remove the crust, butter the bread, and cut into cubes 1/2 inch square. Brown in oven or fry in deep lard. Cream of mushroom soup. Cut 1 1/2 cupfuls of mushrooms into fine pieces. Cook in 2 tablespoonfuls of melted butter until tender, but not brown. Remove the mushrooms and brown 1 tablespoonful of flour in the butter. Then cook another 1.5 cups of diced mushrooms in 1 pint of milk and 1/2 pint of cream. Cook in a double boiler until the cream has a mushroom flavor. Then remove mushrooms and add the hot milk and cream to the cooked flour, mixing the 2 gradually. Return to the double boiler, add all the mushrooms and cook until of good consistency. Then strain and serve very hot. End of chapter 1.
Chapter 2 of Wholesome Cooking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Wholesome Cooking by Ethel Harris. Fish. General directions. The principal thing to be considered in buying fish is its freshness. This can be determined by the fullness and prominence of the eyes, the thickness and firmness of the flesh, and the brightness of the scales and gills. When fish is to be fried or broiled, have the steaks cut about 1.5 inches thick. Full directions for baking any kind of fish are given below. Also directions for boiling fish. Baked fish with dressing. Fish with white flesh are best suited for baking. These are pickerel, pike, whitefish, and bass. Wash, salt, then wipe the fish that has been trimmed to suit. Score the sides a very little to prevent bursting open. Then rub inside with a little salt and pepper. Fill with any of the dressings. Sew carefully with soft cotton. Then sprinkle a little more salt and pepper on both sides, and either dredge well with flour or give it a very fine sifting of cracker crumbs on top. Omit crumbs on bottom as they are likely to scorch. A covered roaster is best, as the browning process can be better regulated. Some skewer the fish into a circular shape, but it may be laid in pan straight. As fish is dry, plenty of butter is needed. A few strips of salt pork could be laid over the fish and the pan, put into a hot oven without adding water. After the fish begins to brown, a half pint of water and a large tablespoonful of butter can be poured over. A medium-sized fish of 3 to 4 pounds will require about 40 to 50 minutes, but let this be your test. Try where fish is thickest. Insert a fork carefully. If it is flaky and separates readily, the fish is done. In taking up, great care must be exercised not to break the fish. To serve baked fish, garnish with sprigs of parsley and pour a few spoonfuls of melted, not browned butter over. Fluffy mashed potatoes and creamed onions are a good accompaniment. Dressing for baked fish. 1/2 loaf of baker's bread, 1/4 cupful of minced Spanish onions, 2 eggs, 1 tablespoon of butter, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt, 1/2 saltspoonful of pepper, water as needed. Scrape the crumbs out of the half loaf, leaving only the thin crust. Cover with cold water for a few minutes. Press dry between the hands and fluff apart. Add the seasoning and well-beaten eggs. Cook but not brown the onions in the butter. Add to bread, stir well with a fork, and then fill the fish and bake as directed. Boiled trout. Prepare fish as directed for baking. If an oblong kettle is at hand, lay the fish on a small old platter. If it must be cooked in a round kettle, use a plate and carve fish by tying a broad band of muslin around it. Now slip a piece of cheesecloth or clean muslin under the plate and tie or pin into a loop. Through this, slide a long-handled spoon on a stick, which must rest on sides of kettle and keep the fish hanging under water, but so as not to touch bottom. The kettle must be large enough to have fish well immersed and water to be boiling briskly. 1 tablespoonful of salt for about 6 cups of water, and either 1 spoonful of vinegar or 2 slices of lemon may be added. This makes the fish firm. Allow about 10 minutes for each pound. Test as for baking after lifting from kettle. If flesh does not flake easily, return once more to the kettle. When draining, slide fish onto an old folded towel to drip, then transfer to a hot platter and garnish with little sprigs of parsley. Then serve with sauce in separate bowl. Boil fish insipid unless it is served with a piquant sauce. Fried fish. Perch, small river trout, and any of the large saltwater or fresh fish cut into suitable pieces may be fried. Rub fish well with salt and pepper, dredge with flour or dip in a well-beaten egg and roll in cracker dust. Have a generous piece of fresh lard and a little ham or bacon fat in a pan. Cook fish a nice golden brown on both sides. As soon as it flakes when tried with a fork, drain off the fat carefully. Then put a liberal piece of butter in the pan. Let this bubble, but do not get too brown. Turn fish carefully so all parts come in contact with the butter. Then serve on hot platter. The cooking of the fish in the lard is to prevent it from scorching, and after draining off the fat, the butter imparts the delicate flavor fried fish should have. This is also more economical. Unless you often fry fish, it may not be best to keep the fat, as it can be used only for fish. Cream salt mackerel. Soak the fish overnight and wipe dry before using. Broil on a buttered gradient over a clear fire. Lay on a hot dish and pour over it a cream sauce made as follows. Into 1 cup of boiling water, stir 2 teaspoonfuls of cornstarch, rubbed smooth with 1 tablespoonful of butter. Cook until well thickened. Add a well-beaten egg, mixing carefully to prevent curdling. Cook a moment longer and season with a teaspoonful of chopped parsley and a saltspoonful of pepper. Codfish à la crème. Pick the requisite amount of salt codfish, which has been well soaked, into small pieces. Cover with cold water. Let it heat gradually to near boiling and then drain. If it is not then fresh enough, cover again with fresh, cold water and repeat the slow heating, removing from the fire the instant it reaches the boiling point, and drain on a sieve. Make a white sauce, put in the fish, and cook until the whole is near boiling. To make this richer, mix the yolks of 2 eggs with half a cupful of cream and add to the sauce before the fish is put in. And to make still richer, add an ounce of butter in small pieces after the eggs and cream and just before the fish. Serve over boiled new potatoes. Boiled white fish. Wash well in cold water a nice fresh fish, wipe carefully and rub with salt. Wrap in a thin cloth and place in 2 quarts of boiling water, to which have been added a half cupful of vinegar, 6 cloves, 6 peppercorns and 1 bay leaf. Allow 10 minutes to each pound of fish. Then remove carefully and garnish with sliced lemon and parsley. Planked white fish. Clean and split the fish and take out the backbone. Put skin side down on an oak plank 1 inch thick and a little larger than the fish. Cover the plank where exposed with salt and pepper it lightly. Brush over with melted butter. Bake about 20 minutes under the flame of a gas stove. Send to the table on the plank. Broiled shad roe. Wipe, sprinkle with salt and pepper. Put in greased wire broiler and broil on each side for 5 minutes. Serve with melted hotel butter. Creamed oysters. Melt 1 tablespoonful of butter in small frying pan on stove, stirring in slowly as it melts. A heaping tablespoonful of flour. Add 1 pint of cream, stirring all the time. When it begins to thicken, take from the fire for a few minutes and add the beaten yolk of an egg, stirred in well, and return to the fire. Keep stirring while you heat to the scalding point a pint of oysters in their own liquor. Skim them carefully. Drain off the liquor and add them to the cream. Just before serving, add a tablespoonful of sherry. Oyster patties. Prepare a cream sauce by above recipe, but do not put in any sherry. When the oysters and sauce are piping hot, put in shells of paste, which may be bought at any pastry cooks for that purpose, and which are generally more satisfactory than those made at home. After filling the shells, put them in the oven a moment or 2 to heat. The shells have, of course, been heated before the oysters have been put in them. Creamed crabs. Remove meat from as many crab shells as there are guests, carefully preserving the shells. Have ready a sauce similar to that for creamed oysters. Add the crab meat to the sauce. Mix well. Then refill the shells. Put finely grated breadcrumbs dotted with bits of butter on top and put the shells in a roasting pan in the oven until the breadcrumbs are browned. Lobsters are also good prepared in this manner. In fact, the recipe given above for cream sauce is a capital foundation for any kind of creamed fish or shellfish. Cold cooked fish is very good warmed over in this way. Pigs in blankets. Drain 25 oysters and season with salt and pepper. Cut very fat pork or bacon into thin slices. Wrap an oyster in each slice and fasten with a wooden toothpick. Fry in a hot pan in the grease of the bacon until brown on both sides. Serve on small triangles of toast with a garnish of parsley. Fried smelts. Wash and dry well 2 pounds of smelts. Break 2 eggs. Beat well and season with pepper and salt. Dip the fish in the egg and then roll in breadcrumbs or oatmeal. Fry to a light brown in lard or clarified dripping. Serve immediately after cooking or they will lose their freshness and crispiness. Garnish with slices of lemon and parsley. Smelts make a good breakfast or luncheon dish. Creamed salmon. 1 can of salmon pulled into fine pieces with a fork. Make a sauce as follows. Boil 1 pint of milk, thickened with 2 tablespoonfuls of cornstarch, which has first been mixed with a cup of cold water. Add 2 tablespoonfuls of butter, half a teaspoonful of salt, and half a saltspoonful of pepper. Prepare 1 pint of grated breadcrumbs. In a pudding dish, put a thin layer of breadcrumbs, then a layer of the salmon, then of the sauce. Fill the dish in this manner, having the breadcrumbs on top. Dot with bits of butter and bake in the oven until brown. Fin and Hardy. Wash the fish, put in a kettle of boiling water and boil 20 minutes. Then lift onto a hot platter and pour over it a cupful of cream or rich milk which has been previously heated. Some people prefer to soak the fin and Hardy for an hour in cold water, then to drain it well and put it in a very hot frying pan in which a tablespoonful of dripping or lard has been heated, and fry slowly until it is a light brown and cooked through. Serve with a tablespoonful and a half of melted butter poured over the top. Scalloped oysters. Scale and beard 1 quart oysters. Strain the liquor into a stew pan. Add to it 2 ounces butter mixed with 2 ounces flour, a little cream, anchovy sauce, nutmeg, cayenne, and salt. Put this over the fire and boil 10 minutes. Add the yolks of 2 eggs, a little lemon juice, and a little chopped parsley. Cut the oysters in halves. Add them and stir all together over the fire for a few minutes. Now fill your shells or baking dish with this preparation and cover with a thin layer of breadcrumbs. Place in the oven for a few minutes, brown and serve hot. After adding the oysters to the sauce, be careful not to allow them to remain too long over the fire, or they will become tough and the sauce watery. Scalloped clams. Same as for scalloped oysters, except that the clams should be chopped and a suspicion of mace or nutmeg added to the other seasoning. Cold boiled lobster. Wash and brush thoroughly a live lobster, tie claws and tail with twine, and plunge into boiling water in which has been put a teaspoonful of salt. Boil 10 minutes, then move to back of range and let simmer for 30 minutes. Drain and cool and eat with tartar or mayonnaise sauce. Fish sauces. Mayonnaise. To the mashed yolks of 2 hard-boiled eggs, add a dessert spoonful of dry mustard, half a teaspoonful of cayenne pepper, a teaspoonful and a half of salt, the yolks of 2 raw eggs, a pint of olive oil put in drop by drop while stirring, the juice of half a lemon, a quarter of a cupful of cream, a quarter of a cupful of vinegar, put in a cool place or on ice. Tartar sauce. Tartar sauce is made by adding to the mayonnaise given above 2 tablespoonfuls of finely chopped green onions and pickled gherkins with a few capers. Drawn butter with eggs. Rub together 1/2 cupful of butter and 2 tablespoonfuls of flour. Then stir in 1 pint of boiling water, or if you prefer, use part milk. Let boil and add a 1/2 teaspoonful of salt. If used for fish, boil 2 eggs hard, slice them and add to sauce. If the sauce is intended for new potatoes, add a little chopped parsley. For cauliflower, the sauce is very good with addition of a little grated cheese. Tomato sauce. Let 1 chopped onion brown in 1 tablespoonful of butter. Add 3 tablespoonfuls of tomato ketchup and 2 tablespoonfuls of butter and minced parsley. Stir well and pour over fish. Melted trail butter. Mix 2 tablespoonfuls of finely chopped parsley with 3 tablespoonfuls of cold and melted butter. Lay this in small pieces over the fish to be melted by the heat from it. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Wholesome Cooking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Wholesome Cooking by Ethel Longley Harris. Meats. General directions. In selecting a roast, it is poor economy to buy anything but what the butchers call heavy beef. This has more nourishment in it than the lighter beef, being well streaked with fat. Mutton should be hung for at least a week before using. Get your butcher to weigh and trim a leg of mutton and put it in his refrigerator until it is needed. Pork is fit for the table only in the fall and winter and should be very thoroughly cooked. All meats should be washed in cold water when they come from the butchers and dried with a clean cloth. Roast beef. The best pieces for roasting are the sirloin and the rib roasts. 12 to 15 minutes to the pound is the average allowance for cooking. Dredge your meat lightly with flour. Add a cupful of cold water to baste with. Cover tightly. There are pans made specially for roasting meat. And baste every 15 minutes. Never touch the meat with a fork while it is cooking, as this allows the juices to escape. Do not season it with salt or pepper until it is well scurried over, as the salt has the effect of drawing out the juice. Put it in a very hot oven to start, and after 15 minutes lessen the heat, and cook slowly the remainder of the time. These directions hold good for any kind of roast. Roast beef should be served with a thick brown gravy, the directions for which are given under the head of gravy, and Yorkshire pudding is always a good addition to a roast of beef. Yorkshire pudding. To 2 eggs beaten very light, allow 2 cupfuls of milk and 2 cupfuls of flour with a teaspoonful of baking powder. Mix well. Take 3 large spoonfuls of gravy from the beef roast, put in a bread pan, and let it come to a boil on top of the stove. Then pour in the butter and let it bake 30 minutes in the oven. When it is done, cut it into squares with a sharp knife and put on the platter around the roast. Roast turkey. After the turkey is drawn, which is generally done at the butcher's, wash the inside out well in salt and water. Fold the wings back and fasten them with a skewer. Skewer the legs together and bind strips of salt pork over the breast and legs to keep the turkey from drying too much. The dressing has been inserted before the legs have been skewered and is made as follows: 1 quart of breadcrumbs, 1½ teaspoonfuls of salt, half a teaspoonful of pepper, 2 tablespoonfuls of butter melted, beaten yolks of 2 eggs, 4 tablespoonfuls of summer savory, 1 tablespoonful of sage. Moisten this with water and stuff the turkey with it. After the lower part is filled, make a slit in the neck and fill the breast so it will look plump. Sometimes chopped oysters are used in place of the herbs. A turkey should cook very slowly and be well basted. A turkey weighing 7 or 8 pounds will require 2 hours or more if cooked in a very slow oven. Roast chicken. Chicken should be prepared in the same manner as turkey and the same recipe for stuffing used. For a medium-sized chicken, 3/4 of an hour in a slow oven will be required. Beef steak. The best cuts of steak are the porterhouse and the sirloin. A steak should be cut 3 inches thick, for it shrinks in the cooking, and a thick steak, when broiled over a good fire, is quickly seared on the outside and preserves the juice. A steak should never be cooked in any way but broiling. When it is put on a hot platter for serving, pour over it 3 large tablespoonfuls of melted butter seasoned with pepper and salt, and a little Worcestershire sauce. This, with the juice of the meat, will make sufficient gravy. Never under any circumstances put water in the gravy. Roast mutton or lamb. Lamb and mutton should be washed and wiped dry, then put in a hot oven with a cup of water for basting and well dredged with flour. Salt and pepper should be added half an hour before the roast is taken out. They should be basted every 15 minutes, and the time allowance should be 12 minutes to the pound. Lower the gas in the oven after the first 15 minutes. Roast pork. Pork requires very slow and thorough cooking, so it is best to allow 20 minutes to the pound. Prepare in the same manner as you would a roast of beef. Sometimes a leg of pork is boned and stuffed with breadcrumbs and sage and onions. Applesauce is served with it. The gravy should be thick, the recipe for which is given under the head of gravy. Roast fillet of veal. A fillet of veal is cut from the upper part of the leg. Have the butcher remove the bone and bind and skewer it up securely, leaving the space where the bone was taken out for the stuffing to be put in. Season 3 pints of breadcrumbs with pepper and salt and the grated rind of a lemon. With this, put 3 tablespoonfuls of summer savory, 2 tablespoonfuls of melted butter, and a tablespoonful of chopped parsley. Bind these ingredients together with a beaten egg. Fill the space in the fillet where the bone was. Lay 2 slices of fat salt pork on top and dredge with flour. Put a cup of water into the roasting pan to baste with. Cover the pan when the roast is in and cook in an oven that has been made very hot for the first 15 minutes. Then cool it off a little and cook slowly. 2 hours will be required for a 6-pound roast. During the last half hour, have the cover removed so the meat will be well browned. With the dressing that is left, make little balls about the size of new potatoes. Fry in lard and put around the veal when it is served, alternating with thin slices of lemon. Serve with this a thick brown gravy made by the same recipe as that given for roast beef gravy. Veal loaf or beef loaf. 3.5 pounds of raw veal put through the mincer with 1/2 pound of salt pork. Add 1 small tablespoonful of salt, half a tablespoonful of pepper, 2 cupfuls of rolled cracker or breadcrumbs, 2 cupfuls of milk, 2 beaten eggs, a 1/4 cup of melted butter, and half an onion minced fine. Mix the dry ingredients, add the liquids, and mold with the hands into the shape of a loaf of bread. Bake in a covered pan with 2 cups of water to baste it with. Cook slowly for nearly 2 hours and cover the last hour to brown. Beef loaf is also made by this recipe, substituting beef for the veal. Round steak may be used. Rabbit stew. Wash the rabbit well, cut it into quarters, lard them well with slices of bacon, and fry them. Then put them into a stew pan with little more than a pint of broth or stock, some savory herbs, salt and pepper to taste. Simmer gently until the rabbit is tender, then strain the gravy. Make a roux of 1 tablespoonful of melted butter and 3 tablespoonfuls of flour. Cook until very thick. Add gravy, let come to a boil. Pour over the rabbit and serve. Garnish with slices of bacon. Veal cutlets with tomato sauce. Select the nicest cuts of veal chops, sprinkle lightly with salt and pepper, Then roll in cracker crumbs and fry in plenty of butter until well done. Have ready a sauce made of 1 coffee cupful of canned tomatoes, in which has been cooked 1 small onion, chopped fine. Add a saltspoonful of salt and half as much pepper. Cook slowly a long time until the onion is tender and the sauce thick. Add a teaspoonful of butter and pour over the chops. Serve hot at once. Stuffed roast goose. After stuffing and trussing the bird, sprinkle with salt and pepper and lay thin strips of fat salt pork on breast. Stuffing. Finely chop 1 onion. Add 1/4 cupful finely chopped salt pork. Cook 10 minutes. Strain off fat. To fat, add 1 1/4 cups soft stale bread crumbs and 2 cups riced potatoes, 1/3 cup butter, 1/3 cup finely chopped celery, 1 egg slightly beaten. Season. Cook goose in oiled paper bag or in roaster and baste every 15 minutes. Veal birds. 2 pounds veal chops, about 1 bunch parsley, 2 ounces bacon, 1/2 onion, 1/2 cupful breadcrumbs, 1 saltspoonful salt, 1/4 saltspoonful paprika. Cut veal in 3-inch squares. Put bones in soup kettle. Pound each piece out flat. Place on top of a strip of thin bacon 3 inches long and a 1/2 inch wide, a spray of parsley and a teaspoonful of breadcrumbs. Sprinkle with salt and paprika and add a few drops of onion juice. Roll the veal tightly and skewer in place with metal skewers. Brown in hot fat and place in casserole. With the fat in which the bird has been browned, make a thin brown sauce and add to the casserole, covering the birds. Bake until tender. When ready to serve, arrange the birds on the platter, remove the skewers, cover with brown sauce, and garnish with sprigs of parsley. Spanish stew. Put a pound of round steak through the meat grinder and grind it fine. Have in a saucepan smoking hot 2 tablespoonfuls of meat drippings or of lard and butter mixed. Into this turn your ground meat, which should have been dredged with flour. Brown the meat in the fat and have ready a large onion chopped fine. Pour a cupful of hot water over the meat and add the onion. This liquid will make a brown gravy for the onion to cook in. After 5 minutes, add 2/3 of a can of tomatoes and a good-sized red pepper. If one prefers the taste of cayenne, one may add this to taste. Simmer all together until the onion is done. Have ready a cupful of boiled macaroni and mix it with the foregoing stew. It is well to season the macaroni with cayenne while it is cooking. Before serving this dish, add 1 teaspoonful of salt. Creamed calf's brains. Blanch the brains by parboiling them and remove all bits of string and skin. Throw into cold water and, when cold, cut into pieces about 1 inch square. Cook together a tablespoonful of flour and 1 of butter and pour upon them a cup of rich milk. Season with a saltspoonful of salt and a 1/4 saltspoonful of cayenne. Add a pinch of baking soda to the milk. When the sauce is smooth and thick, add a tablespoonful of minced parsley and the brains. Stir until well heated, then put in gradually, stirring all the time, the beaten yolk of an egg. And when this has cooked for a minute, add a tablespoonful of sherry. Serve on a hot dish, garnishing with small triangles of toast. Jagged rabbit. Into a stone crock slice a large onion and add 1/2 teaspoonful each of salt, pepper, paprika, and a 1/4 saltspoonful of cayenne. Put into the crock the jointed rabbit, which has been cleaned and laid for an hour in cold water, to which a cup of vinegar has been added. Cover the rabbit with sliced bacon and cover with water. Put the top on the crock and bake slowly for an hour. Thicken the gravy before serving the rabbit. Stewed beef heart. Soak the heart in cold water for several hours to draw out the blood. With a sharp knife, cut out the muscles and tough top. Dry and fill with this stuffing. 1 cupful of fine stale breadcrumbs, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt, 1/4 teaspoonful of pepper, 1 teaspoonful of chopped onions, a 1/2 teaspoonful of dried sweet herbs, 2 tablespoonfuls of melted butter. Sew the top well together and wrap in a piece of cheesecloth. Fit it into a small saucepan, point downward, pour in enough boiling water to come almost to the top. Add a tablespoonful of tomato ketchup and a 1/2 teaspoonful of salt. Cover and simmer slowly for 3 hours. Remove the heart and keep it hot. Thicken the gravy with slightly browned flour. Boil and add seasoning and 2 or 3 tablespoonfuls of sherry. Strain and serve, passing currant jelly with the meat. Pigeon pie. This is Mrs. Abraham Lincoln's recipe. Make a fine puff paste. Lay a border of it around a large dish and cover the bottom with a veal cutlet or a tender steak. Sprinkle with a 1/2 teaspoonful of salt, a 1/2 saltspoonful of cayenne pepper, and a saltspoonful of mace. Prepare as many pigeons as can be put in one layer of the dish, breast downward. Sprinkle the birds with a 1/2 teaspoonful of salt and a 1/4 saltspoonful of cayenne pepper. Dot with butter and cover with sliced hard-boiled eggs, 6, and a cupful or 2 of veal broth. Cover with a crust and bake slowly for 1.5 hours. English beefsteak pudding. Remove the membrane from 1/2 pound of beef suet and put it through the chopper. Mix it with a pint of sifted flour, a teaspoonful of salt and a dash of pepper. Add sufficient ice water to mix to a stiff dough and roll out 3/4 of an inch thick. Cut 2 pounds of round steak into each pieces. Season with 1 teaspoonful of salt and 1 saltspoonful of pepper and dredge lightly with flour. Thickly butter a 2-quart bowl. Lay the dough in it. Press lightly so that it will fit well and trim it off, leaving an inch or more at the top. Fill with the meat and add a 1/2 cupful of cold, thin gravy, tomato sauce, stock, or water. Roll out the trimmings to form a cover and lay it over the top, moistening and slightly pressing the edges to make them adhere. Wring a thick cloth out of cold water, dredge well with flour, lay over the top, gather it under the bottom of the bowl and tie firmly. Put a plate or trivet in the bottom of a kettle of boiling water, stand the pudding on it and boil hard and steadily for 3 hours. Liver à la Begue. This is a recipe from the famous Begue restaurant of New Orleans. Secure a fine bit of calf liver, fresh and of good color. Skin well. Have a quantity of lard in a frying pan, well heated. Slice the liver in thick slices. Place in the lard and let it cook slowly, after seasoning with pepper and salt. Let the lard cover the liver. Simmer over a slow fire and when cooked drain off the grease and serve on a hot plate. Tripe à la Cayenne. Assuming that the tripe has been properly cleaned and washed, not pickled, cut 2 pounds into ribbons, 1 inch wide and 3 inches long. Cut a 1/4 pound of bacon into dice. Bone a calf's foot, cut into 6 pieces, and cook with the bacon until half done, stirring to prevent burning. Next, put into a saucepan with the tripe 10 tiny onions, 2 carrots cut into dice, 3 cloves, a blade of mace, 1/2 dozen sprigs of parsley, and a gill of brandy, salt and pepper to taste. Over all, pour 1 quart of veal stock. Simmer for half an hour, then turn into an earthen jar with a cover, or a brass jar will do. Bake until thoroughly done. Remove the parsley, skim off the fat, and serve in the jar, known in France as a marmite hot. The dish may be cooked over a gas plate, the flame turned low, if it is not convenient to use the oven. To clarify drippings. To clarify drippings, use beef suet preferably, but any trimmings of fat, except mutton and lamb, may be tried out. Put trimmings into a crock and 3/4 of a teacup of boiling water. Set the crock in a pot of boiling water and put all on one corner of the range, where the suet will melt slowly. Pour the fat off into a clean bowl or jar as it melts, and add a little more boiling water to the unmelted suet. When all is melted, strain and set aside for use. Keep cold. Every day all the bits of fat left from meat, the fat skimmed from soup and gravy, should be saved, melted in water as above, directed, strained and set aside in a cold place. Once a week these drippings should be collected, brought up to the boiling point of our water, strained and set aside. This process will ensure sweet fat for frying or sauteing. Meat sauces. Gravy. After meat is cooked in a frying pan or broiler, and the juice and fat caught in a pan underneath, or after it is roasted in a pan, we have the foundation for the gravy proper. A liquid made of stock and thickened is really a sauce and not a gravy. Take the meat out of the pan when cooked and pour off all but 1 tablespoonful of the fat in which it was cooked. Into this dredge as much flour as will make it a paste, and rub the two well together over the fire until cooked to a light brown. Pour over this as much boiling water as will reduce it to the thickness of cream. Add a tablespoonful of mushroom ketchup, if liked, and a spoonful of salt. Simmer for 5 or 10 minutes, stirring constantly, and pour through a strain, if not perfectly smooth, into a gravy boat or over the meat, if this way of eating the gravy is preferred. Gravy for cold meats may be made in a similar way, and the cold slices simmered in it until heated through. Some cooks make a meat extract and keep it always on hand for the making of gravy. A pound of Hamburg steak may be gently cooked an hour or more, and the extract used for this purpose. Bread sauce. Put 1 pint of milk in a double boiler with a sliced onion. Let it cook until the milk is thoroughly seasoned with the onion. Then remove the onion. Put in a bit of butter, half the size of an egg, cayenne pepper, and half a teaspoonful of salt. 1/2 hour before serving, thicken with fine breadcrumbs and stir until smooth. This sauce requires some care in making, as it should be perfectly smooth. This sauce is used for poultry and game, beside the usual brown gravy. Mint sauce. Pick all the leaves from a good-sized bunch of mint and chop them fine. Add a small tablespoonful of white sugar and 4 tablespoonfuls of best vinegar. Let stand for a couple of hours before using. There should be 2 tablespoonfuls of the mint after it is chopped to this amount of vinegar, to be beaten with lamb. End of chapter 3.
Chapter 4 of Wholesome Cooking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Wholesome Cooking by Ethel Longley Harris. Vegetables. Timetable for vegetables. Boil potatoes half an hour if of medium size, less time if they are very small. Medium-sized onions should be given an hour, peas and asparagus 25 minutes, green corn 25 minutes, cabbage and cauliflower 30 minutes, carrots and turnips 45 minutes when young, and in winter an hour. Beets take an hour in summer, and from an hour and a half to 2 hours in winter. Lima beans take half an hour when young, 45 minutes when old. At first glance, it may seem that undue prominence has been given to the potato, But when one takes into consideration that for 365 days in the year, the potato in some form or other makes its appearance on the table, always at dinner and often for luncheon, there can scarcely be too many methods by which its manner of serving may be varied. Eggplant fried. Slice the eggplant into half-inch slices and let it lie in salted water for 3 hours. Dip in beaten egg and cracker crumbs. Fry in hot butter, turning carefully until it is cooked through and a light brown in color. Breaded onions. Slice Bermuda onions, roll in egg and cracker crumbs, and fry in bacon fat. Brown well. Succotash. Stew in least possible quantity of water, equal parts of green corn and lima or string beans until tender. Add 1/2 cupful of cream or milk, a lump of butter half the size of an egg, pepper, and salt. The water should of course be drained off before the cream is added. Italian spaghetti. Cook in 3 pints of water 2 pounds of lean, tender beef cut in 2-inch squares. When done, remove the meat from the broth and place in a hot spider with a tablespoonful of ham or bacon drippings. And when browned nicely on all sides, set back on the range until ready to serve. Take 1/2 package of spaghetti broken in 2-inch lengths, blanched, and add to the meat broth with 1 can of strained tomato, a tiny clove of garlic, 1 can of button mushrooms, and 1/2 cupful of grated cheese. Season with 1 teaspoonful of salt and 1 saltspoonful of pepper, and simmer 1/2 hour. Place the meat in the center of the platter and surround with the spaghetti mixture. This dish is almost a meal in itself. 1 cupful of dried mushrooms soaked in cold water overnight may be used in place of the fresh or canned with equally good results. Spaghetti and cheese romaine. 2 cupfuls of broken spaghetti, 1 cupful of minced cheese, 1 cupful of milk, butter the size of an egg, yolks of 2 eggs. This dish should be quite yellow. Cook the spaghetti 20 minutes in boiling salted water and drain dry. Put the cheese, butter, and half the milk into a saucepan. Add a saltspoonful each of salt and pepper. Then add the whole to the spaghetti. Put in a baking dish and bake to a yellow brown as quickly as possible. Saratoga onions. Peel and thinly slice 3 large white onions and soak in milk for 10 minutes. Then drain and dry on a towel. Separate the slices into rings, put a dozen or more at a time in a frying basket, and plunge into smoking hot fat. Take out as soon as delicately colored, drain for a moment on unglazed paper, turn into a heated dish, dust lightly with salt, and serve at once. Carrots in casserole. 2 pounds of carrots, 2 tablespoons of butter, a half teaspoonful of salt, a half teaspoonful of sugar, 1 teaspoonful of onion juice, a liberal shaking of pepper, and water as needed. Pare carrots and cut into strips size of a lead pencil. Cut these in 2-inch lengths. Heat butter in a close-covered casserole. Add the washed carrots and a very little water, about a 1/4 cupful to begin with. Cover and simmer over low fire. From time to time, shake the kettle to prevent settling. After half an hour, add the seasoning, and if needed, add a little more water, but at no time have the carrots more than moist enough to prevent burning. When tender, they should be delicately flavored and just right to take up without draining or needing any thickening. For a change, try half this amount of carrots and add 1/2 can of drained green string beans half an hour before serving. In that event, shake 1 teaspoonful of flour over and stir in with a fork 5 minutes before serving. Fricassee of parsnips. Scrape the parsnips and boil in milk until they are tender. Then take out and cut in 4 pieces, if they are large. Add a piece of butter the size of a walnut, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt, and half a saltspoonful of pepper in the milk they were boiled in. Thicken it with a very little flour, put parsnips back in the dressing, and let them simmer about 40 minutes. Corn fritters. 1 pint of grated corn, either fresh or canned, half a cup of milk, half a teaspoonful of salt, 1/4 teaspoonful of pepper, 1 teaspoonful of melted butter, 2 eggs well beaten, 1 teaspoonful of baking powder, mixed with enough flour to make a thick batter. Fry by the spoonful in hot lard. Turn as you would pancakes. The corn, whether fresh or canned, must have been cooked previous to using it for the fritters. Hot creamed cabbage. Chop fine 1 small cabbage, cover with boiling water, and put in soda the size of a pea. Boil for 15 minutes, then drain off the water. Melt a tablespoonful of butter, add a tablespoonful of flour, stir until smooth, add a cup of rich milk, and when it is very hot, pour over the cabbage, which has been put into a vegetable dish, and serve. This may be varied by putting the cabbage into a baking dish after it has been mixed with the cream, grating cheese over the top, and letting it remain in the oven until the top is browned. Creamed celery. Boil in salted water, a teaspoonful of salt to a quart of water, until tender, 1 pint of celery cut in small pieces. Melt 1 large tablespoon of butter, add 2 of flour, and stir in gradually 1½ cups of milk. Cook for 5 minutes, then drain celery, put it in a baking dish, pour the sauce over it, grate cheese on top, add some small pieces of butter, and bake until browned. Fried tomatoes. Dip rather thick slices of tomatoes in a batter made of 1 egg, half a tablespoonful of flour, half a teacupful of milk, and fry brown in lard or butter. Scalloped tomatoes. Season half a can of tomatoes with a teaspoonful of salt, a saltspoonful of pepper, and the juice of an onion. Add a cupful of finely minced celery. Butter baking dish, and first put in half of the tomatoes, then a layer of buttered soda crackers sprinkled with 2 heaping tablespoonfuls of grated American cheese. Then add the tomatoes, sprinkle the tops with crumbs and bits of butter, and bake for 20 minutes. Spinach à la crème. Turn the spinach from the can an hour before cooking it. When you are ready to do this, mince it fine and set it over the fire in the inner vessel of a double boiler, the outer being filled with boiling water. While the spinach is heating, make a roux in a frying pan of 1 tablespoonful of flour and 2 of butter. When this is smooth, stir it into the hot spinach. Season with white pepper and salt to taste, with a teaspoonful of white sugar, a dash of nutmeg, and a teaspoonful of lemon juice. Beat all together over the fire and cook for 10 minutes, stirring often. Heat half a cupful of cream in a separate vessel with a bit of soda the size of a pea, and when it is scalding hot, beat into the spinach. Cook 3 minutes more, stirring and beating all the time. Serve smoking hot, garnishing the dish with triangles of toast. Buttered beets. 6 small young beets, 1 tablespoon of butter, 1/4 teaspoonful of salt, a dash of paprika, a pinch of sugar. Cut the leaves from the beets, being careful not to cut too close, as that will let out the juices and make the beets pale and insipid. Wash well, then boil in enough water to cover. When tender, drain, then pour cold water over. This enables you to slip the skin off. Now cut into neat slices. Heat butter in pan, add the beets and seasoning, shake and let heat through well. When serving, have vinegar on table, as it is liked by many. General rules for boiling and baking potatoes. If potatoes are to be baked or boiled in the skin, select them of even size and not too large. Scrub well and remove any blemishes. Also, clip off a little piece from each end to let moisture escape. If boiled in skin, put on in cold water, so that they will heat gradually and not burst open before they are done. If peeled and boiled, put on in boiling water. When tender, drain well, then hold over low fire and shake kettle, lifting, then replacing cover until potatoes are dry and mealy. If boiled in skin to be used for frying or salad, drain them into a strainer and set aside to cool. This retains their shape. Baked potatoes. Scrub and trim as directed. Set in hot oven in old baking pan or on grating. Have oven very hot at first, then decrease heat and bake until they are soft and yield readily to pressure. This will require about 45 minutes or possibly longer. Stuffed baked potatoes. Bake as directed. When done, cut top off lengthwise, scoop out the interior, place in hot bowl and mash, adding salt and pepper to taste, and 1 tablespoonful of butter and 1 of milk to every 2 potatoes. Mash this and beat up lightly, then fill into the potato shells, dot with butter, and bake until light brown. A teaspoonful of onion juice, minced ham, or parsley may be added to the mixture before filling. Mashed potatoes. 8 medium-sized potatoes, 1 tablespoonful of butter, 1/4 to half a cupful of milk, 1 teaspoonful of salt, a few shakings of pepper, and water and salt for boiling as needed. Peel and cut potatoes into even pieces. When ready to cook, cover with boiling water. After they have begun to boil, add a teaspoonful of salt, boil until tender, drain and dry as directed in general notes. Now mash with a good wire potato masher until smooth. Add seasoning, butter, and milk, and whisk with the masher or a strong fork to make them creamy. Pile lightly in hot dish to serve. Creamed potatoes. 3 cupfuls of potatoes cut into small cubes, 1 cupful of milk, 1 tablespoon of butter, 1 tablespoon of flour, salt and pepper to taste, and 1 tablespoon of parsley. Cover potatoes with boiling water, adding a teaspoonful of salt, and boil until just done, but not broken. Heat milk in double boiler, rub flour and butter smooth, pour on some of the hot milk, then add to milk and boil until thickened. Season to taste. Drain potatoes and slide into hot milk. Let bubble up once or twice, then pour into hot serving dish and sprinkle the parsley over them. O'Brien potatoes. Peel and dice into a baking dish 9 medium-sized cold boiled potatoes, salting well. Chop 1 green pepper fine and parboil for 3 minutes. Make a sauce of 3 cupfuls of milk thickened with 2 tablespoonfuls of flour. Stir in the parboiled shredded pepper, add to potatoes, turning grated cheese over the top, and bake 20 minutes. This recipe is for a large family. Curried potatoes. 8 medium-sized cold boiled potatoes are diced. In a frying pan, a tablespoonful of chopped onion is slowly cooked in 2 tablespoonfuls of butter until it begins to color. The potatoes are then added, salt, pepper, and 1 scant teaspoonful of curry powder sprinkled over them, and when well mixed, 1/2 of a cupful of good stock and 1 tablespoonful of lemon juice should be poured in. The potatoes should be carefully tossed and cooked until all the liquid is absorbed, then dished and sprinkled with a little chopped parsley. Sweet potato compote. Spread slices of boiled sweet potato in a buttered pudding dish. Sprinkle with brown sugar and dot with butter. On this, put thin slices of peeled apple, also sugar and butter. Alternate potato and apple, having 5 layers altogether. Use plenty of butter and sugar. Pour over a cup of water and bake until the apple is soft and the liquid a thick syrup. Baked potato espagnole. Bake 6 medium-sized white potatoes, cut open lengthwise and remove contents. Mash potatoes with 1 grated onion, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoonful of butter, 1/2 cupful of cream. Replace the potatoes equally in 12 shells. Place a pimento on top of each and brown in the oven. Scalloped sweet potatoes. Slice raw sweet potatoes very thin. Butter a pudding dish and arrange a layer of sliced potatoes in the bottom, and sprinkle with a teaspoonful of flour, several bits of butter, and a very little salt and pepper. Continue in this way until the dish is filled. Pour in enough milk to moisten the whole thoroughly and bake for 40 minutes. Raw fried potatoes. Pare the potatoes and slice into very thin, even slices. If potatoes are large, they may be halved or even quartered before slicing. Lay in cold water at least an hour before frying. Heat about 1 tablespoonful of good sweet lard or unsalted beef drippings in a frying pan. Drain potatoes well, put in pan, and cover and let steam about 10 minutes. During this time, shake pan a few times so the potatoes will not stick. Then uncover and with a spatula turn potatoes. To be correctly made, raw fried potatoes should be nicely browned and tender inside. They must not be mashed or scorched. It is best to start with unsalted drippings. Now begin to fry very slowly without cover. If they do not get tender in the same proportion as they brown, cover again to let them steam. Toward the last, shake half a teaspoonful of salt and a saltspoonful of pepper over and add a generous tablespoonful of butter. Shake and turn so all are evenly seasoned and serve very hot. To be at their best, these potatoes should be served as soon as done. The amount of shortening given is sufficient for 6 to 8 medium potatoes. For a change, potatoes may be cut into small strips or cubes and fried raw. Hashed brown potatoes. Peel boiled potatoes, chop rather fine, add half an onion finely minced to 1 quart chopped potatoes. Heat an iron frying pan and put in it 1 tablespoonful of butter or good drippings. This portion is about right for 5 or 6 medium potatoes. At first, let the potatoes cook very slowly and do not stir or lift them. After a few minutes, lift the edge carefully and see if they are beginning to get light brown. As soon as they are well colored, lift them in as large sections as possible and turn over. Add a little more shortening and again let them brown. Now shake 1 teaspoonful of salt and 1 saltspoonful of pepper over them. Turn again and season other side. If both sides have browned well, turn potatoes to one side of pan, melt a little good butter on the one side, then turn the potatoes over on that. Shake pan to spread them. Let cook a few minutes more, then serve. Potato cones. Beat mashed potatoes until light and creamy and form into cones, using an ice cream mold if you have one. Then put the potato cones into a buttered baking dish, brush with melted butter, and brown in a hot oven. Potato roses. Cream mashed potatoes very thoroughly by beating, and fill a pastry bag with the mixture. Hold the bag in an upright position, the tube pointing downward, and force out the potatoes and coil around in smaller and smaller circles or shape in bow knots. These should be forced out on a buttered tin and browned in the oven. A funnel of heavy brown paper may be used instead of a bag. Potatoes with cheese. Press very creamy mashed potatoes into a buttered baking dish, grate cheese over it, and bake in oven for a few minutes. See recipe for drawn butter under fish sauces on page 9. End of Chapter 4, read by Jennifer Wilson. Chapter 5 of Wholesome Cooking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Wholesome Cooking by Ethel Longley Harris. Salads. General directions. Lettuce should be washed in cold water as soon as it comes from the shop, then put in cheesecloth or clean brown paper, well squeezed to press the water out, and then put on the ice for at least 2 hours before using. If these directions are followed, the lettuce will be crisp and cold. The oil is an important factor in making a good salad, and a reliable domestic oil is superior to the imported. If cream is used as a substitute for oil, it should be thick and rich. Grapefruit and nut salad. Peel 1 large solid grapefruit. Remove all white skin and peel each carpel. Be careful not to squeeze so as to start the juice, but if any does flow, save it. Rub the bottom of a platter delicately with garlic. Arrange crisp lettuce leaves on it, and pile the grapefruit pulp in the center. Keep on ice until ready to serve, then make a French dressing at the table. Sprinkle 2 tablespoonfuls each of chopped almonds and chopped pecans over the grapefruit. Pour over the French dressing and serve. Cauliflower salad. Boil cauliflower in salted water until tender, then pull apart into flowerets. Marinate with 3 tablespoonfuls each of vinegar and of olive oil, half a teaspoonful of salt, and half a saltspoonful of pepper. When ready to serve, drain and arrange on a dish. Tuck between the flowerets boiled beets cut into slices. Place lettuce heart in top and wreath base with stiff mayonnaise. Cold slaw with sour cream. Chop 1/4 of a head of cabbage. Do not salt it. Set in the ice until ready to serve. Then put a portion on each plate, and on the top of each portion put 2 tablespoonfuls of sour cream dressing made as follows. Whip a cup of thick sour cream until stiff. Add gradually 1/2 cup of strong vinegar and 1/2 cup of granulated sugar alternately, and stir in 1/2 teaspoonful of salt. Keep in a cool place until you serve. Grape salad. 1 pound of white grapes, 1 head of lettuce, 1 pint of chopped celery, mayonnaise dressing. Skin the grapes, cut in 2, and remove seeds. When ready to serve, mix all together and send to table on lettuce leaves. Chicken salad. Boil 1 large chicken. When cold, cut the meat into cubes of about 1 inch. Some people prefer to use only the white meat, but both kinds are good. To the chicken, add 1/2 the amount of celery cut into cubes. Mix, pour over it a good mayonnaise, and serve very cold. Egg salad. Peel and cut in 2 lengthwise 6 hard-boiled eggs. Put on a lettuce leaf, add 2 chopped olives and a little parsley, and cover with French dressing. Pineapple salad. Put 2 thick slices of canned or fresh pineapple on each plate. Add a little of the juice to a French dressing made by the recipe given below, omitting the onions. The pineapple and lettuce should be thoroughly chilled, and just before serving, enough of the dressing to moisten it well should be poured over each portion. Potato salad. Boil potatoes until they are waxy, not mealy. Cut into thick slices or into cubes, and add a tablespoonful of finely chopped onion to each pint of potatoes. Make triple the quantity of French dressing given in the recipe. Pour half of it over the salad several hours before it is served, and pour the other half over it just before it goes to the table. It should be very cold. Tomato aspic. Boil 2 carrots in a granite pan with 1 quart of tomato juice, 1 sliced onion, and 1 red pepper. When carrot is cooked tender, strain all. Put into the strained juice 1/2 box of gelatin which has been dissolved in a cup of hot water, and allow it to stand until it shows signs of setting. Then pour 1 spoonful into each cup mold, add a slice of carrot cut out with fancy cutter, then more liquid, then slices of olive, and more liquid, adding nut meats before the mold is full, if these are liked, or other vegetables. Set on the ice to harden. Watercress is pretty around this. Tomato jelly with celery mayonnaise. Put a can of rich tomatoes through a sieve, then cook liquid with a stalk of celery, a small piece of onion, a bay leaf, a whole small pepper, and a few cloves, cooking until the tomato juice is slightly flavored by all these ingredients. Then strain through a fine cloth or sieve and add 1 tablespoonful of tarragon vinegar for every quart, and a box of gelatine which has previously been soaked some hours in about 1/2 cup of water. Strain and set in individual molds. To make a hollow cup-shaped form, put a little mold inside a large one and pour the liquid in between and let the mold set in ice until the jelly has hardened. When set, pour hot water into the inner mold and let stand until the mold loosens from the jelly. Fill the hollow mold of tomato jelly with celery mayonnaise and pour a little more of the liquid tomato on the top. Let this harden and then add a tablespoonful more of the tomato to each form, so that the mayonnaise and oil will not soak through the jelly. Keep molds on ice until time to serve. When ready to serve, set molds in warm water, but remove quickly so that the jelly will not melt much. Turn out on lettuce leaves. Salad dressings. Cooked salad dressing. There are many persons who dislike the taste of oil, and for them there are cooked dressings. One which will keep a long time is made as follows. Beat together 3 eggs, add a 1/2 cupful each of warm water and vinegar, and stir over the fire in a double boiler until as thick as custard. Do not cook too fast or the mixture will curdle. Take off and add 3 tablespoonfuls of butter. Stir until blended. Add a 1/2 teaspoonful of salt and a dash of cayenne and set aside. Keep cold, and when wanted, add an equal quantity of stiffly whipped cream. Mayonnaise. For a recipe for mayonnaise, see Fish Sauces, page 9. French dressing. To every 3 tablespoonfuls of olive oil, put 1 of vinegar, a teaspoon of salt, a pinch of cayenne, and 1 teaspoonful of onion juice, or small onion minced very fine. End of Chapter 5, read by Jennifer Wilson.
Chapter 6 of Wholesome Cooking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Wholesome Cooking by Ethel Longley Harris. Eggs and Cheese. Although eggs are generally served as a breakfast or luncheon dish, a sweet omelette often takes the place of puddings or pastry at dinner, and a combination of eggs and cheese is also often used as a dinner dish. To ascertain the freshness of eggs, drop them into a saucepan of cold water. Those perfectly fresh will at once sink to the bottom of the saucepan, but those not so fresh will show a tendency to rise or stand on one end. Welsh Rarebit. When 1 tablespoon of butter is nearly melting in a chafing dish, add 1.5 pounds of cheese cut into small pieces. Then add a teaspoonful of dry mustard and a pinch of cayenne pepper, mixed in a tablespoonful of beer or cream. Stir constantly, adding gradually 1/2 pint of beer, or, if you prefer it, cream. Serve piping hot on toast. Cheese fondue. 1 cup of rolled crackers, 1 cup of milk, 3/4 of a cup of grated or finely sliced cheese, 2 eggs, yolks and whites beaten separately, 1 teaspoonful of salt, and 1 saltspoonful of pepper. Stir all together, bake about 20 minutes in a very quick oven. Serve immediately. Curried eggs. Chop 1 onion and slice thin 1 tart apple. Melt 1 tablespoonful and 1/2 of butter in a saucepan. Add apple and onion and cook quickly until a golden brown. Stir in 1 scant teaspoonful of curry powder, 1/3 of a teaspoonful of salt, and add 1 tablespoonful of flour. When browned, add gradually 1 cupful and 1/4 of milk, and continue to stir until thick and smooth. Quarter lengthwise 5 or 6 hard-boiled eggs. Lay in the sauce. Draw to one side and keep very hot for 10 minutes. Serve in a border of boiled rice. Creamed eggs. 4 eggs, 1/3 cupful of milk, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt, 1 teaspoonful of butter, and 1 tablespoonful of finely minced green peppers. Beat the eggs and salt until well mixed. In a smooth pan, melt the butter. Add milk, and when that bubbles, pour in the eggs. Keep shaking pan and stir so eggs will not settle. Also, turn with a knife, but do not break up too small. As soon as done, turn onto rounds of soft toast, with crust removed, or into hot dish. Sprinkle pepper over and serve at once. Scrambled eggs, excellent for chafing dish. 4 eggs, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt, 1 tablespoonful of butter, and 6 tablespoonfuls of milk. A clean, smooth saucepan or small spider that is used only for eggs should be used. Melt and heat, but do not brown, the butter. Beat the eggs without separating. When well blended, add the milk and salt. Pour into the pan, then shake and turn so that all parts are cooked without perceptible coloring. They should be jelly-like. Turn on nicely toasted bread with crust trimmed, or serve in a hot dish, garnished with a little parsley or finely cut chives if the onion flavor is liked. French omelette. Break 4 eggs into a dish. Give them 8 strokes with a silver fork, no more, to mix whites and yolks. Add salt and pepper to taste. Have a small frying pan on the fire, and when it is hot, put in a piece of butter the size of 1/2 an egg. When the butter is sizzling hot but not brown, pour in the eggs. As they cook, lift them with a knife around the edges so that the egg on top can slip down to the bottom of the pan. When the top is of the consistency of thick boiled custard, double the omelette over in half and serve on a very hot dish. Endless variations may be made with this as a foundation. A little grated cheese may be put in the omelet before it is doubled over, or if a sweet omelet is desired, a little jam may be used in the same way. Mushrooms that have been previously heated through are very good with the eggs, and so are asparagus tips or oysters. Poached eggs. Have the water boiling hard. Break the eggs one at a time into a saucer and slide them from the saucer into the water, which should be deep enough to cover them. When they are done, remove them in a skimmer and let them drain for a few seconds before putting them on squares of buttered toast to serve. If a tablespoon of vinegar is added to the water they are cooked in, it will keep the eggs white. Fried eggs. Eggs should be fried in butter or bacon fat, never in lard. The grease should be hot before the eggs are put into it, and they should be watched carefully to prevent sticking to the pan. Serve with bacon or ham, or on squares of toast. Boiled eggs. Boiled eggs take 3.5 minutes for medium soft and 4.5 to 5 minutes for well done. Hard-boiled eggs should be boiled 15 minutes and then dropped into cold water to prevent discoloration. End of Chapter 6.
Chapter 7 of Wholesome Cooking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Stacey M. Wholesome Cooking by Ethel Longley Harris. Pastry. The best kind of a pastry board is of marble, as it keeps the paste at a low temperature. Often, the marble top of an old table or washstand may be utilized. Failing marble, a pastry board should be of hard wood, about 3 feet by 2 feet. French pastry cooks prefer a rolling pin without handles, 18 inches long and from 2.5 to 3 inches in diameter. A good plain paste. 2.5 cupfuls of flour, 1/2 cupful of butter, 1/2 cupful of lard, 1/2 cupful of ice water, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt. Mix as quickly as possible. 1/2 teaspoonful of baking powder should be sifted in with the flour. This paste is also improved by being made the day before it is needed. Puff paste. To every pound of good pastry flour, allow a 1/2 saltspoonful of salt and 1¼ pounds of lard and butter mixed in the proportion of 3/4 of a pound of butter to 1/2 pound of lard. Divide the shortening into quarters, and with your hands rub 1/4 into the sifted flour until very thoroughly mixed. Moisten with ice water, putting as little water as is possible to hold the flour and shortening together. Roll out thin and dab small pieces of shortening over the paste. Fold up and roll out again until all the butter and lard are in. Some cooks pound the paste with the roller every time they roll it up, but this is not necessary for good puff paste. Add as little flour to it while rolling out as you can manage with. Put on a plate, sift flour over the top, and put it on ice until the next day. Paste is always better if not used the same day it is made. When rolling out for use, get it as thin as possible. Mincemeat. 1 fresh beef tongue, boiled and chopped fine. 3/4 pound of suet, chopped fine. 2 pounds of seeded raisins. 2 pounds of washed currants. 1 pound of mixed peel, chopped fine. 1 pound chopped figs. 2 pounds best brown sugar, cinnamon, and nutmeg to taste. A pinch of mace, and 1 of salt. 1 pound of shelled and blanched almonds, chopped fine. The juice of 3 lemons and 3 oranges. The grated rind of 1 lemon and 1 orange. 4 pounds of chopped apples. Mix well. Put in a covered stone crock and make it quite moist with brandy or whiskey. This will keep all winter if moistened occasionally with liquor. Cream pie. 3/4 pint of cream, sweetened and flavored to taste. Beat the whites of 3 eggs to a stiff froth. Add these to the cream. Pour into a deep pie dish lined with puff paste. Put a rim of paste around it and bake until firm. It will look like a custard pie, but will be white and very rich. It is best cold. Banbury's. 1 cupful of finely chopped raisins, 1 square soda cracker rolled fine, 1 egg, the juice of 1 lemon, 1 cupful of white sugar. Mix well and bake in puff paste, shaped as you would for turnovers. Lemon cheesecakes. 1/4 of a pound of butter, 1 pound of white sugar, the yolks of 6 eggs well beaten, the juice and grated rind of 3 lemons. Cook over steam or in a double boiler until the thickness of honey. Keep in a covered jar in a cool place until wanted. It will be good for a couple of weeks. Bake in patty pans lined with puff paste, allowing a heaping teaspoonful of the mixture to small patty pans. Eat cold. Coconut pie. 3 eggs, 1/2 cupful of sugar, 1 cupful of grated or prepared coconut, 1 pint of milk, 1 tablespoonful of cornstarch, blended with a little of the cold milk. Cook a minute or 2 before putting it into a pie plate lined with the pastry. Then cook in oven long enough to do pastry. A cheap lemon pie. 1 egg, 1 tablespoonful of cornstarch, dissolved in a little cold water. Add 1 cupful of hot water and a small piece of butter, the size of half an egg. Boil it all for a minute or 2, and when cold, add 1 cupful of sugar and the juice and grated rind of 1 lemon. Cook in paste made after the recipe for good plain paste. Custard pie. 1 pint of new milk, 3 eggs well beaten, 1 small teacupful of sugar. Beat all together, flavor to taste with nutmeg, line pie plate with crust, and bake. Better cold. Apple pie. Line pie plate with crust, fill with apples sliced very thin, strew over them 3/4 of a cupful of sugar, 1 teaspoonful of cinnamon or half a grated nutmeg, a little water to moisten, and scatter over top small pieces of butter. Bake 25 minutes. Pumpkin pie. Peel pumpkin, cut into small pieces, and steam until soft, then rub through a colander. To 4 heaping tablespoonfuls of this, add a gill of cream, a gill of rich milk, half a cup of sugar, 3 well-beaten eggs, 1 tablespoonful and a half of butter. Season with a pinch of salt, half a teaspoonful of cinnamon, 1/4 of a tablespoonful of ginger, and half a grated nutmeg. The ginger may be omitted if desired. This will make 1 large or 2 small pies, to be eaten cold with rich cream. Rhubarb pie. 2 cups of chopped rhubarb, about inch-long pieces, and 1 cup of sugar. Mix together and allow to stand while you beat the yolks of 2 eggs with 1 heaping tablespoonful of flour. Lay some bits of butter over the fruit, add a pinch of salt, then pour the egg mixture over, and bake with or without top crust for half an hour. End of Chapter 7.
Chapter 8 of Wholesome Cooking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Wholesome Cooking by Ethel Longley Harris. Puddings. General directions. In mixing puddings, the dry ingredients should be mixed together first, the salt and baking powder sifted with the flour, and then the milk and eggs added. When the yolks and whites are beaten separately, the yolks are put in first. The whites go in last of all and should be stirred in very lightly. Suet paste for boiled or steamed puddings. To 2 cups of flour and 2 teaspoons of baking powder, take 1 1/2 cupfuls of chopped and shredded suet. Add enough cold water to make it into a paste, and half a teaspoon of salt. Roll to the thickness desired. Very economical and nourishing, good for meat pies as well as puddings. Baked batter pudding. 4 heaping tablespoons of flour mixed with a teaspoon of baking powder, 3 well-beaten eggs, a piece of butter the size of an egg melted, and 2 cupfuls of rich milk. Mix well and bake in a quick oven for half an hour. Must be served as soon as removed from oven or it will fall. Serve hard sauce with it. Orange pudding. The juice and grated rind of 2 oranges, 2½ cupfuls of breadcrumbs, 1 cupful of sugar, 1½ cupfuls of milk, 3 eggs well beaten. The pulp of 2 oranges may be used as well as the juice. Bake in a buttered pudding dish until well set. When it is cold, turn it out into a glass dish and cover with whipped cream. It is better if it's made the day before it's needed. Lemons may be substituted for oranges if lemon pudding is desired. Snow pudding. Dissolve half a package of gelatin in half a pint of boiling water, and then add half a pint of cold water. Beat the whites of 3 eggs very light, add a cupful of white sugar, and then the gelatin water, and a teaspoon of lemon juice or extract of lemon. Beat it with a Dover egg beater in a cool place until it is stiff. Then pour into a mold to set, previously inserting the mold in cold water so that the inside will not stick to the pudding. When set, turn out and serve with a custard made of the yolk of the eggs. Custard. Heat a pint of rich morning's milk, add the beaten yolks of 3 eggs, half a cupful of sugar, and a saltspoonful of salt. Stir steadily in a double boiler until it thickens sufficiently. Then put it aside to cool. Roly-poly pudding. Make a paste. Roll out half an inch thick, spread thickly with any kind of jam that's not too juicy, and roll it up into the shape of a jelly roll. Have ready a pudding cloth, wrung out of boiling water and thickly floured. Roll the pudding in it, tie it at each end, place on a plate in a steamer, and steam for 2 hours. Apple dumplings. Make a suet paste or an ordinary plain paste if preferred. Roll until it is 1/4 inch thick and cut into squares. Pare and core some apples. Place one in the center of each square. Fill the apple with sugar butter and cinnamon. Bring the corners of the paste together to cover the apple. Put in a buttered dish in the steamer and cook half an hour or bake in the oven for the same length of time. To be eaten with cream and sugar or hard sauce. Chocolate pudding. Make a cornstarch pudding with 1 quart of milk, 3 tablespoons of cornstarch, and 3 tablespoons of sugar. When done, remove about half and flavor to taste. Add to what you have left in the kettle an egg, beaten light, and 2 ounces of vanilla chocolate. Put in a mold alternating with the dark and light. Serve with whipped cream. Snowball pudding. Cream half a cupful of butter. Add 1 cupful of sugar and the whites of 4 eggs. Mix 2 teaspoons of baking powder with 2 cupfuls of flour. Add this to the above mixture in portions, alternately with half a cupful of sweet milk. Steam 20 minutes. Roll in powdered sugar and serve with sweetened cream. Tapioca pudding. Soak 1 cupful of tapioca in 2 cupfuls of hot water for 3 hours. Beat yolks of 3 eggs with 3 tablespoonfuls of sugar, grated rind of half a lemon, 1 tablespoonful of melted butter, and a saltspoonful of salt. Boil 1 quart of milk, stir all together, then add the beaten whites of 3 eggs. Bake 30 minutes. When the pudding begins to bake, stir it a little from the bottom and it will not separate. Stale sponge cake pudding. Slice stale sponge cake, put a layer in the bottom of a bowl, and soak with raspberry juice. Then put spoonfuls of the canned raspberries over the cake. Have ready some cornstarch made quite thin. Pour over the cakes, and then put another layer of cake and fruit and fill up with the hot cornstarch. When cold, turn out and serve with cream. Bread and butter pudding. Cut slices of bread a medium thickness, spread with butter, and lay in a pudding dish. Over this, put a layer of currants, sugar, and nutmeg. Then add more bread and butter and another layer of currants, etc., and repeat until the dish is full. Pour over this 2 eggs well beaten, 1 quart of milk, and sugar to taste. Bake 20 minutes. Rice pudding. 1 cupful of soft-boiled rice, 1 pint of milk, 3 eggs, 1 lemon, 1 pint of sugar, and butter the size of an egg. Separate the eggs and mix the yolks with the rice and the other ingredients and a little grated rind of the lemon. Then beat the whites of the eggs and add the sugar and juice of the lemon. Put on the top and bake. Bake the pudding just enough to harden the eggs. English plum pudding. 4 pounds of raisins, 4 pounds of currants, 2 pounds and a half of suet, 2 pounds and a half of breadcrumbs, 1/4 pound of flour, 2 dozen and a half eggs, 1 pound and 1/4 of candied peel sliced very thin, 1/2 pint of brandy, a tablespoon of mixed spices, 2 nutmegs grated, and 1 pound of sugar. Mix all the dry ingredients together first. Boil for 12 hours at least. It may be half-boiled one day and finished the next. It is better if made some weeks before using. Boiled apple puffets. 3 eggs, 1 pint of milk, a little salt, sufficient flour to thicken as waffle batter, 1 1/2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder. Fill teacups alternately with layers of batter and then of apples, chopped fine. Steam 1 hour. Serve hot with flavored cream and sugar. Kiss pudding. Boil 1 quart of milk in a custard kettle. Stir it into 4 heaping tablespoons of sugar and 4 heaping tablespoons of cornstarch, dissolved in a little cold milk or water, and added to the well-beaten and strained yolks of 4 eggs. Have the whites of the eggs beaten into a stiff froth with 1 teacupful of pulverized sugar and 1 teaspoonful of essence of vanilla. Spread on top of pudding, put in a quick oven, and brown. Take from the oven, sprinkled with grated coconut, and set away to cool. Use cream or not, as you choose. Marmalade pudding. 1 pot of marmalade, 1 cupful of suet minced fine, a good cupful of grated bread or sponge cake, 1 wineglassful of sherry or brandy, some candied lemon or citron peel, minced very fine, a grated nutmeg, 4 eggs, and 1 tablespoonful of sugar. Pour the marmalade into a bowl and then add the breadcrumbs and the other ingredients, the eggs last. Boil in a well-buttered mold 2 hours and a half. Serve with clear brandy sauce. Cabinet pudding. Stone 2 dozen large table raisins, butter a bowl, and stick them all over the inside of it. Then fill up the mold with a thick custard made of milk, 3 or 4 eggs, and a cupful of finely grated bread, 2 tablespoonfuls of sugar, a few chopped almonds, and any flavoring desired. Boil or steam 1 1/2 hours. Turn out and serve. Fig pudding. 1/2 pound of figs well chopped, 2 cupfuls of fine dry breadcrumbs, 3 eggs, 1/2 cupful of sugar, 1/2 cupful of chopped beef suet, a pinch of salt, 1 teaspoonful baking powder dissolved in hot water, and stirred into 1 cupful of milk. Soak the crumbs in the milk, add eggs and sugar well beaten, then add salt and suet, and last of all the figs. Steam 3 hours in a well-buttered mold. Apple tapioca pudding. 1/2 pint even, full of tapioca, washed and soaked overnight in 1 1/2 pints of cold water. In the morning, cook until it looks clear in the same water, which will take 1/2 hour. Then add 1/2 cupful of sugar, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of extract of lemon, and 1 1/2 pints of peeled and sliced apples. Turn into buttered pudding dish and bake 1 1/4 hours. Let it stand in a cool room 1/2 hour, in order that the tapioca may stiffen a little in losing some of its heat. Serve with sugar and whipped cream. Pudding sauces. Lemon sauce. Take 2 cupfuls of sugar and 1 tablespoon of butter, cream together and add 1 1/2 cupfuls of boiling water and the rind and juice of 1 lemon. Hard sauce. Beat to a cream 1/2 cupful of butter, adding gradually 1 cupful of white sugar. Stir until very smooth. Put in a little mound in a glass dish and grate nutmeg over the top. Foam sauce. Take 1 cupful of white sugar and 1/3 cupful of butter, cream together, add 1 beaten egg, and stir all together until light. Then add a teaspoon of vanilla. 5 minutes before sauce is needed, pour on boiling water, stirring constantly. Add enough water to make a pint of sauce. Queen sauce. Heat 2 cupfuls of rich milk to a scalding point. Add 4 tablespoonfuls of sugar, white. Wet 1 tablespoon of cornstarch with cold milk and stir it in. When sauce thickens, beat in whites of 2 eggs beaten stiff, a few drops of extract of bitter almonds, and half a grated nutmeg. Take sauce from the fire, put it in a jug, and stand the jug in boiling water to keep it warm, but not to cook until it's wanted. Congress sauce. Beat the white and yolk of 1 egg separately, then together, and add 1 cup of sugar and butter the size of a walnut. Put in a bowl over a boiling tea kettle on the back of the range for 20 minutes without stirring. Add 1 wineglassful of sherry and serve. End of Chapter 8. Read by CMachado.
Chapter 9 of Wholesome Cooking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by BettyB. Wholesome Cooking by Ethel Longley Harris. Bread and breakfast cakes. General directions. In making breakfast cakes, the rule given for puddings should be followed. That is, the dry ingredients should be mixed together first and the liquids added. If sugar is used, it should be put in after the salt, baking powder, and flour have been sifted together. A hot oven is required for all breakfast cakes of the popover, muffin, or gem variety. Scones cook more slowly. For waffles or pancakes, the waffle iron and griddle should be very hot. Bread. Boil 3 or 4 small potatoes. Have a quart of sifted flour ready in a bowl. Make a well in the center. When the potatoes are cooked soft, pour about half a teacupful of the boiling potato water into the flour. Let it stand until you mash the potatoes. Add to them 2 cups of milk and 2 cups of water, lukewarm. Put in a large teaspoonful of lard or butter and a teaspoonful of salt, and if desired, a tablespoonful of sugar. Stir well into the flour. Soak a cake of yeast in lukewarm water until it dissolves, and add that to the mixture the last thing. If you set it at 8 in the evening, it will be ready to be made into loaves in the morning. After it is made into loaves, it should rise 20 minutes before being put in the oven. Bread should rise in a warm, not hot place. If too cold, your bread will be heavy. If too hot, it will be sour. It should rise to twice its original size before forming into loaves. Do not have loaves too large for the pan, or they will be a bad shape. Bake ordinary loaves of bread 40 minutes in a slow oven. When you take your bread from the oven, rub over with melted butter, as it makes the crust tender and imparts a nice flavor to it. Bread should be kept in a stone jar and well covered. Simple graham bread. 2 cupfuls of unsifted, finely milled graham flour, 1 cupful of warm milk and water, half a teaspoonful of salt, 2 teaspoonfuls of sugar, 1 cake of compressed yeast, 1 teaspoonful of sweet lard or butter. Soak the yeast overnight in the cold water. In the morning pour off the water, add sugar, rub salt and shortening into the flour. Add yeast to the liquid, beat into flour, cover, and let stand until double its bulk. Then beat again, pour into a greased pan, let stand about 30 to 40 minutes, then bake until straw comes out clean. Muffins. 1/3 of a cup of butter, 1/4 of a cup of sugar, and the same of salt. 1 egg, 2 cupfuls of flour, 1 teaspoonful of baking powder, 1 cupful of milk. Beat butter, sugar, and egg until creamy. Add the milk a little at a time, stirring in gradually the flour, which has been sifted twice with salt and baking powder. Grease the muffin pans, heat slightly, put in the mixture, and bake quickly. Waffles. Mix 1 pint of sifted flour into a smooth paste with 1 pint of milk. Beat in a tablespoonful of butter and a saltspoonful of salt, and lastly 2 eggs beaten light. Have waffle iron hot and ready greased. Pour in enough batter to cover the lower side and close the upper one gently down upon it. Keep over fire for half a minute and turn over for same length of time. Remove and place in the oven a few moments to crisp. Cornbread. In making cornbread, use shallow pans and grease them thickly, as the batter has a tendency to cling to the sides and bottom. Scald 1 pint of fine meal with just enough boiling water to moisten, adding 1 large spoonful of shortening and a scant teaspoonful of salt. Cover closely and set aside until warm. Then add 3 well-beaten eggs, a pint of sifted flour, 1 teaspoonful of baking powder, and enough milk to make a thin batter. Do not have it more than an inch deep in the pans. Less is better, for much of the delicacy of corn bread is due to its thin, crusty crispness. Bake in a hot oven. Graham Gems. 1½ cupfuls of Graham flour, 3/4 cupful of flour, 1/4 cupful of sugar, 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt. Sift all together and mix with a cupful of milk. Beat well and drop into lightly greased hot gem pans. Bake for 20 minutes. This recipe makes 1 dozen gems. Soda biscuits. 2 cupfuls of flour, 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, butter the size of half an egg, 1 saltspoonful of salt, and a pint of cream or very rich milk. Flour the board sufficiently to prevent the dough sticking, roll out and cut with a round cutter into cakes an inch and a half in thickness. Let them rise for 10 minutes and bake in a rather hot oven. Popovers. To every egg take 1 cupful of milk, 1 cupful of flour with a teaspoonful of baking powder and 1 tablespoonful of melted butter. Stir all together. Heat the popover pans very hot in the oven. Grease them well, pour in the mixture until the holes are half full, and bake for 20 minutes. Buckwheat cakes. Good buckwheat cakes are a rarity. Get some unadulterated buckwheat flour. To a quart of warm water allow 2 cupfuls of this and half a yeast cake. Let rise overnight and add in the morning, just before cooking, half a teaspoonful of soda, a teaspoonful of salt, and 2 teaspoonfuls of molasses or sugar. The cakes should spread very thin, be full of air holes, and are of an inimitable flavor when eaten fresh from the griddle, with butter and the best of syrup. Tea rolls. 1 quart of flour, 1 tablespoonful of lard, 2 tablespoonfuls of butter, 1 tablespoonful of sugar, a little salt, 1/3 cake of compressed yeast dissolved in half a cupful of warm water, 1 pint of boiling milk. All the ingredients should be stirred in with the boiling milk except the yeast, which is added when the sponge is a little cool. Knead down 3 or 4 times. Half an hour before rolls are wanted, roll out and cut with cake cutter. Fold together with piece of butter in middle. Let them rise till light, then brush over with an egg and bake. Cornmeal pancakes. Take 2 cupfuls of cornmeal and a teaspoonful of salt. Pour over it boiling water to make a batter. Let stand to cool, then add the yolks of 3 eggs beaten, enough flour to make of the proper consistency, and 1½ teaspoonfuls of baking powder. Just before baking add the whites of the eggs, beaten stiff. Sour milk pancakes. 1 pint of sour milk, 1½ cupfuls of bread crumbs, 1 tablespoonful of melted butter, a little salt, 3 eggs, enough flour to give good consistency, and half a teaspoonful of soda. French pancakes. 2 eggs, 2 ounces of butter, 2 ounces sifted sugar, 2 ounces flour, 1 teaspoonful of baking powder, half a pint of new milk. Mix thoroughly and bake in buttered plates in a quick oven for 20 minutes. English pancakes. 3 eggs, half a cupful of sugar, piece of butter the size of an egg, 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, half a pound of currants, and nutmeg. Beat the butter and sugar to a cream, then add the other ingredients and enough flour to make a thin batter. Fry in lard. This is a good substitute for a pudding. Johnny cake. 1/4 cupful of butter, 1/4 cupful of sugar, 1 egg, 1 cupful of sweet milk, 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 1 cupful of cornmeal, 1 cupful of flour, and a saltspoonful of salt. Bake in a greased biscuit tin, and when done cut in squares and send to the table hot. Fanny cake. 1 cupful of milk, 3 cupfuls of flour, half a cupful of sugar, 3 eggs, 1 teaspoonful of soda, 2 teaspoonfuls of cream of tartar. Mix well and bake in a deep biscuit pan. Serve warm for tea. Muffins. Warm a piece of butter the size of a hen's egg in 1 pint of milk. When it is melted, set off to cool, then stir in 4 beaten eggs, 3 tablespoonfuls strong homemade yeast, and enough flour to make a thick batter. Cover and set it to rise. If wanted for breakfast, set the last thing at night. If for tea, set just before dinner. When about to bake them, stir in a little bit of soda dissolved. Bake on a hot griddle in muffin rings. Slip a knife under them to turn. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10 of Wholesome Cooking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by BettyB. Wholesome Cooking by Ethel Longley Harris. Cakes. General directions. In cake making, the following simple rules should be observed. The butter should first be stirred to a cream and then the sugar added. When these ingredients are well mixed, add milk, if there is any in the recipe, then a little of the flour, then half of the well-beaten eggs. Then flour and eggs alternately until all are in. The baking powder should be sifted with the flour. If the eggs are beaten separately, put in the yolks alternately with the flour and add beaten whites last. Stir them in very lightly. The flavoring should be added just before baking. See that the tins are well greased, and if no time allowance is given for baking, try the cake by inserting a clean straw in it. If the straw comes out without any batter adhering to it, the cake is baked. Hickory nut cake. 2 cupfuls of sugar, half a cupful of butter, 3/4 of a cupful of milk, 2 cupfuls of flour, whites of 4 eggs, 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, and 1 cupful of nut meats. French cake. 1/2 cupful of butter, 1 cupful of milk, 2 cupfuls of sugar, 3 cupfuls of flour, 3 eggs, 1 teaspoonful extract of vanilla or lemon, 3 tablespoonfuls of baking powder. Delicate cake. 1½ cupfuls of sugar, 1 cupful of sweet milk, 3 cupfuls of flour, 2 large teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 2 tablespoonfuls of butter, whites of 7 eggs, and 1 teaspoonful of extract of lemon. Bake in layer tins. Filling for delicate cake. Take half a cupful of thick sour cream and whip until thick, but be careful it does not go to butter. Add half a cupful of sugar and whip again. 1 teaspoonful of extract of vanilla and 3/4 of a cupful of almonds blanched and chopped fine. Mix all together and spread between 2 thick layers of delicate cake. Frost all over with boiled icing and put blanched almonds on top. Caramel filling. 3/4 of a cupful of cream, 1½ cupfuls of brown sugar, a small piece of butter, mixed together. Boil for about half an hour until it gets thick. Cool a little on a plate, and if it seems firm, remove from the stove. Stir in 1 teaspoonful of vanilla and stir occasionally until cool. Then use for filling and for the top of the cake. The cake for this filling should be delicate cake. Sponge cake. 2 cupfuls of granulated sugar, 10 eggs, 2 cupfuls of flour, 1½ teaspoonfuls of extract of vanilla. This makes 2 cakes. Beat the sugar and eggs together for 20 minutes, then sift in the flour and stir very lightly. Grease the baking tins. Use half the quantity for a medium-sized cake. This is a particularly good recipe. Banana jelly cake. Beat the whites of 2 eggs and 1 cupful of powdered sugar together until very light. Spread on each layer of French cake, the recipe of which is given above, and place over it bananas cut in thin slices, the pieces joining each other closely, using 3 large bananas. Sprinkle each layer with lemon juice and grated peel, and stir in a little of the peel in the frosting over the top of the cake, using the rind and juice of 1 lemon in all. Angel food. Take flour and sift 5 times, then measure 1 cup even full. Add 1 teaspoon a little more than even full of cream of tartar, and sift the flour and cream of tartar twice, the last time onto a plate. Of fine granulated sugar take 1½ cupfuls, measure after it has been sifted 5 times, last time onto a plate. Take whites of 12 eggs on a large platter and beat until very light. Add the sugar to the eggs half at a time and beat thoroughly. Then add the flour a little at a time and 1 large teaspoonful of extract of vanilla. Bake in an angel food tin with a cover. Line the bottom of the tin with paper. Have the grate in the bottom of the oven, also a small dish of water. This will keep the cake from burning. Have a moderate oven and bake about 60 minutes. Sunshine cake. This cake is made exactly like the angel food above, except that 2 teaspoonfuls of vanilla are used and 3 or 4 drops of extract of bitter almonds. Then, just before turning the mixture into the angel food tin, add the yolks of 6 eggs that have been well beaten. Watch closely while baking and remove the cover before the cake rises to it. Bake from 45 to 60 minutes. Both the above cakes are rather expensive, but every housekeeper likes to have a recipe for a cake that is particularly good, even if it is only used on state occasions. White cake. 1 cupful of sugar, 2 tablespoonfuls of butter, 1 1/2 cupfuls of flour, half a cupful of milk, whites of 3 eggs, 2 small teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 1 teaspoonful extract of lemon, and a few drops of extract of bitter almonds. Plum cake. 1 pound of butter, 1 pound of brown sugar, 1 pound of flour, 1 pound of raisins, 2 pounds of currants, 1 pound of blanched almonds, half a pound of mixed peel, 2 blades of mace, 2 nutmegs, 6 cloves ground, 12 eggs, and a glassful of brandy. Bake 4 hours. Put greased paper in the pans. Nut cake. 1 cupful of butter, 2 1/2 cupfuls of sugar, 1 cupful of milk, 4 cupfuls of flour, 1 teaspoonful of lemon extract, 3 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 6 eggs. When baked, put frosting and walnut meats on top. This makes 2 large cakes. Vanity cake. 2 eggs, 1 cupful of sugar, 4 teaspoonfuls of milk, 1 teaspoonful of butter, 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 1 1/2 cupfuls of flour. Bake in a quick oven. Filling for vanity cake. Half a cupful of sugar, 2 eggs, 2 grated apples and juice, and grated rind of 1 lemon. Stir all together, let boil for 5 minutes, stirring all the time. Spread on the cake while warm. Jelly roll. Line the bottom of a very shallow pan with buttered paper and grease the sides of the pan also. Break 3 eggs in a bowl and beat until very, very light, adding gradually 1 cupful of sifted powdered sugar. Still beating hard, add alternately 1/4 of a teaspoonful of salt, 2 teaspoonfuls of cold water, 1 cupful of sifted pastry flour mixed with 1 scant teaspoonful of baking powder, and, last of all, 1 tablespoonful of melted butter. Spread this mixture evenly over the papered pan and bake about 12 minutes in a moderate oven. Immediately remove the cake from the pan, reversing it on a board. Carefully peel off the paper, moistening it with water if it sticks. Cover quickly with jelly or jam, which has been warmed just enough to admit of spreading. Roll and pin a band of paper around it until the cake is cold, then dust the top with powdered sugar. Spreading and rolling must be done quickly, as the cake will crack if rolled after cooling. Chocolate walnut cake. 6 eggs, 1 cupful of sugar, 3/4 of a cupful of flour, 3/4 of a cupful of chocolate, 1 1/2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, and sufficient vanilla to flavor. Bake in a large milk pan and split in 2 when cool. Fill with this mixture. Boil together 1 cupful of milk and 1 cupful of chopped nuts. Then add the beaten yolks of 2 eggs, sugar to taste, and a little brandy or vanilla. Use 2 whites for chocolate icing. Orange layer cake. Cream together 2/3 of a cupful of butter and 2 cupfuls of sugar, and add the beaten yolks of 3 eggs. Grate the rind and scoop out pulp and juice from 2 oranges, adding sufficient water to make 1 cupful. Add this to the butter and eggs, alternating with 3 cupfuls and a half of sifted flour. Lastly, add the stiffly whipped whites of the eggs, 1/3 of a teaspoonful of salt, and 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder. Bake in 3 layers. For a filling, beat 1 egg until very light and thick. Add the grated rind and half the strained juice of an orange, with half a saltspoonful of salt and sufficient powdered sugar to make very thick. Daisy cakes. Cream 1/4 of a pound of butter with 6 ounces of sifted powdered sugar. Add gradually 1 well-beaten egg, the grated rind of an orange, 1/2 of a cupful of cold water, and 1 cupful of pastry flour sifted twice, with 1 scant teaspoonful of baking powder and half a saltspoonful of salt. Beat steadily for 10 minutes, then turn into little fluted patty pans well buttered, and bake in a moderate oven until nicely colored. When cold, ice with fondant flavored with orange extract, and on the center of each make a daisy with strips of blanched almonds, the center filled with finely chopped candied orange peel. Gingerbread. 1 cupful of molasses, 1/2 cupful of brown sugar, 1/2 cupful of butter warmed in 1 pint of milk, 4 eggs, 1½ tablespoonfuls of ground ginger, 1 tablespoonful each of ground cinnamon and nutmeg, 1 cupful of raisins, 1 teaspoonful extract of lemon, and enough flour to make a stiff batter. Bake in a deep tin very slowly. Put a teaspoonful of baking powder in the flour before it is sifted. Jumbles. 1 cupful of butter, 2 cupfuls of sugar, 1 cupful of cold water, 1 teaspoonful of baking powder, add enough flour to roll out. Cut into rounds as thin as you can roll them and bake in a quick oven. Crullers. 1 pound of butter, 1½ pounds of sugar, 3 pounds of flour with 3 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 12 eggs, 1 grated nutmeg. Roll very thin and fry in deep lard. This is a very rich and delicious recipe. Best cookies. 2½ cupfuls of butter, 3 cupfuls of white sugar, creamed with the butter, 5 cupfuls of flour, 3 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 1 cupful of milk, and enough flour to enable you to roll the cakes very thin on the board. Cut into rounds, sprinkle sugar on the top, and bake in a quick oven. Doughnuts. 2 eggs, 1 cupful of sugar, 1¼ cupfuls of sweet milk, 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt, enough flour to hold them together. Fry when they are very soft in deep lard, boiling hot. End of Chapter 10. End of Wholesome Cooking by Ethel Longley Harris.